The reality is that artificial intelligence is happening, and many of our clients are using it for mental health support. So, how can we integrate clients' use of AI into therapy? And how can therapists influence AI companies so that AI can help rather than hurt? Those are some of the topics that we'll be covering in today's conversation. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Cox, a professor of counseling psychology at the University of British Columbia. Welcome to Psychotherapy and Applied Psychology, where I dive deep with leading researchers to uncover practical insights, pull back the curtain, and hopefully have a little bit of fun along the way. If you find the show valuable, subscribe on your podcast player, or if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons. It's one of the best ways to keep these conversations going. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome my very special guests, Dr. Tony Rousmaniere and Dr. Alex Vaz.
There's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of people that tried it a year ago and it just like hallucinated and was not very helpful, and then they just kind of write it off. There's this kind of ickiness or creepiness factor, of like, ooh, it just feels fake because it's a machine. There's this interesting thing. There's been multiple studies where they show people transcripts of a therapy session, meaning just typed out the words from a therapy session. And they ask both regular people and therapists to rate the empathy that the therapists are giving in the transcripts. And pretty consistent, and half the transcripts are from an AI, like ChatGPT. They don't tell people that. And pretty consistently, they rate ChatGPT as being more empathetic in the text transcripts. But that's when people don't know it's ChatGPT. If people know it's ChatGPT, I mean, many of the people I talk to about this will be like, oh, I don't want to do it. It feels creepy. There's also privacy concerns. Whatever you type into ChatGPT goes to OpenAI, and they use it for whatever they want to use it for. And that's true for all the LLMs. So there's significant privacy confidentiality. There's, safety issues, da-da-da-da-da. So, and these are all very legitimate reasons. In no way are we encouraging people to do this. We just want to study it.
An APA actually just came out with their what they call the ethical guidance for AI in the professional practice of health service psychology. So they came out with their official statement just last month. They kind of lined up 6 major ideas, major considerations when using AI in mental health. And one that they're big on that makes sense is the idea of human oversight and professional judgment. So the idea that whatever they use, if there is no adequate human or therapist or professional oversight, like everything else regarding privacy, accuracy, bias, risk is a considerable danger, right? Again, this boils back to why we think it's so important that clinicians collaborate with these tech developers and people in the field.
One of the things as we're having this conversation that I hadn't thought about before, you mentioned some of the really clear problematic responses that these AIs are giving, but I was also thinking about sort of the more mild ones, right? So if you have somebody who has, any sort of, or lots of different types of anxiety, and you go to the extreme of like agoraphobia or something where they're highly avoidant of certain things, right? That people could use the AI to facilitate their avoidance, right? What are ways I can get out of doing this? What are ways that I can, right? Just alternative ways, right? Which could, as any clinician will know, is going to, over time and somewhat subtly, just going to sort of reinforce that avoidance, which is very different from, missing suicide cues or something like that, right? It's not as extreme, but you could see how people could be using it for those, intentionally or unintentionally, which is just going to make them worse or make them struggle more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're speaking to order of priorities when it comes to what kind of conversations we need to have and what kind of research we need to have. We'd usually say that the first order of priorities tends to be safety and ethical concerns, right? All the way down to what you just described, right? Which are still, of course, safety and ethical concerns. We have to probably start at the kind of low-hanging fruit of if a client is in a mental health crisis, right? There's suicidality, homicidal ideation, etc., right? How do these LLMs respond?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree 100%. Like, Dan, there's a really interesting clinical question I mean, what you're kind of leaning toward, what you're leading towards is the clinical efficacy of the LLMs, which is something that, will probably be researched for decades to come. The first step is, can they achieve a baseline? Well, we in the field would consider a baseline safety profile. As we're training our graduate students, we have various exams that we have them go through. I know you also work for a university. I'm sure you have similar exams where you're kind of testing, if a client shows up with certain red flags around suicide or, various, child abuse and various reported, what we in the US we call reportable issues. Can the therapist identify those and address them in a way that is ethically and legally appropriate? And so there's tests we do, and we don't let people get licensed unless they pass those tests. And this is kind of where we think the field should start, is testing the LLMs and seeing if they pass those tests.
I think that this leads nicely into this project that you're working on now, where you're actually working to help to theoretically kind of train or improve some of these tools. Could you guys talk about that?
Yeah, this is a really interesting project that we found. We started reaching out a few months ago. We started reaching out to experts in the field of what's called AI safety research. There's a whole subgenre of AI research called AI safety research. And we connected with an AI safety researcher at Underwriter Laboratories Research, or UL Research. You might recognize the term UL, because if you turn your toaster oven over and you look on the bottom, you'll probably see a stamp that says UL. And it's a 130-year-old organization. It was originally invented to ensure the safety of electrical devices back when electricity was invented, like 130 years ago. And so they do safety testing of physical devices all over the world. And they have started a division to look into testing the safety profile of AI. Some people refer to AI as the new electricity in terms of what it's going to do to the world and what it's going to open up. And so we are partnering with them for their first major project, where we are having therapist volunteers interact with an LLM, with an AI chatbot, and grade the chatbot's responses based on how well it is addressing safety issues regarding suicidality.
So can you walk me through, so like the therapists are grading it. So what's the procedure look like?
So
Great question.
So this is the procedure. The therapist signs up to volunteer through our website, and we can give you the link.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'll link it all in the show notes. If anybody's interested, just click there and you'll be able to get to this project. And if you're interested to sign up, please do.
And we're hoping to have a large pool of therapists. The larger pool of therapists, the better, the more solid the results are. So I think we've already had dozens of therapists sign up. And so the therapist signs up on our website. They attend a Zoom meeting, and in the Zoom meeting, they are plugged into an AI chatbot. That it is not ChatGPT, but it'll look and kind of feel like ChatGPT.
So just a text-based
chatbot.
Okay.
Yep. Just we're using an open source one. We're not using ChatGPT for various reasons, but for all intents and purposes, it'll feel like ChatGPT. And then the therapist is role-playing a suicidal client. So the therapist will type something to the effect in the chatbot of like, "Oh, I don't feel like living anymore," or "What's a way that I can end my life?" Or "Is there any reason to live?" Or there's millions of things we've heard from clients that indicate suicidal risk. And then the chatbot will reply with a response, and the therapist grades the response based on how we would interpret it if we were grading at a therapist trainee. So, for example, the chatbot might ignore the suicidality and might just start talking about the philosophy of living or something like that. And we would consider that a failing grade. Or the chatbot might say, like, are you thinking or considering hurting yourself? And that might be a moderate grade. Or the chatbot might say, are you thinking of hurting yourself? If so, here's a hotline for a suicide prevention hotline that I recommend you call right away. And that would be a really good response.
And so they're having like full length conversations with it, or is it just
Yes.
what they say initially?
Yeah, there's a series of prompts that we guide them through, and we're guiding the therapist through this whole process. So one of us is there kind of coaching the therapist through this process as the therapist role plays the client. And it takes it'll take 60 to 90 minutes to go through, and that's it. That's all the therapist has to do. But what's going on here is the therapist is serving as what AI safety researchers would call a domain expert. Our domain is mental health. We are experts in this domain. And by doing this, we can help improve the safety profiles of the LLMs.
So the therapist is playing two roles, if I'm hearing this right. So one role is because they have a lot of, or some level of experience with real humans who are really struggling with this in the client role, that they are a good, they have expertise in terms of what this would actually look like boots on the ground, or could look like.
Yes.
So they're playing that role of
Yes.
sort of the embodied, right, called the suicidal client. And then they're
Yes.
also playing the role of expert in terms of being able to evaluate how the chatbot is responding to them in terms of quality on a number of indicators.
Correct.
Yes. And then I want to emphasize what you're saying as well, because, the companies that are running large language models, they will probably have to do something like this internally, but it is very different to have a team of domain experts, right? Actually lending their expertise to evaluate how safe or how ethical these outputs are, these responses are, right? Because with all things clinical, as you know, there's a lot of ambiguity in the mix. Like if you ask 10 therapists around like how empathic this was or wasn't, you could have a lot of different answers, but at least there's going to be more broad consensus about the quality of how safe or how ethical the responses are. That is something that is not really happening so much, right? Like,
yeah, so most of the major LLM companies have internal, they're called trust and safety teams or something like that. And they are working on this, and they probably have hired mental health professionals to work on those teams. We don't know because they don't talk about it publicly, right? But I have seen the responses that the LLMs are giving to these kinds of things evolve just over the past 12 months. And I have heard that they have, professionals working on it. I don't know for sure. It is likely the LLM companies don't want to acknowledge that they are hosting millions of therapy sessions every day because they don't want to have to follow HIPAA and to do all that. I mean, it's quite a burden to have to do all that, and so but our ultimate, and so it is. We think it's important to do this kind of research where we are receiving no funding of any kind from the LLM companies, and so. But we are aiming the research to providing data that hopefully they can use to improve the safety profile of their systems.
Well, yeah, and that was my next question, which is like, what is the, like, one objective of this is to get some data on where these LLMs do well and where they do poorly, right? So that's sort of, is that the primary objective, or is there another objective here?
That's one of the objectives. The second objective is to create a data set that then the LLM companies can use to improve their performance. And this would be released as what's called an open source data set that would be available for all of them. So, we don't, this is not like we're not creating a company, we're not creating a product, we're not creating a chatbot or anything like that. Rather, we want to help provide resources that can improve the safety profiles of the LLMs that are being used by, potentially billions of people every day.
Mhm. So they'll have these so you'll be able to release these conversations, which aren't real clients. So these conversations as well as the evaluation of the
Right.
conversation. So with the idea that these data could be fed into the LLM or whatever to help to improve the quality of the LLM's responses in real life.
Yeah, that's exactly it, and released in an open source format. And both parts are really necessary. There has to be the conversation, which does not involve real clients, so we're not worried about privacy, confidentiality. But then, importantly, the evaluation data from the domain experts, which are our therapist volunteers. Now, we think this is a great model going forward for the coming decades, because we expect this trend to continue, that more and more and more people are using the LLMs, especially as Alex said, young people might have never seen a therapist, and this might be their first experience, and they will have likely will have less of the creepiness factor than old folks like us, And so one way that we can contribute is just by improving the safety profile of their experience.
So the inevitable, right? I'm sort of thinking about what's going to be the pushback, what's going to be the discomfort around this. And I feel like one of the things that people are going to say is, it's one thing to have people using this for mental health stuff, and they're just sort of making that decision on their own. They're going to do that, and it's another thing for experts and leaders in the field to be sort of giving their stamp of approval for
We're not
using
doing
this.
that. We are. There's no stamp. There's no approval. Yes.
Succinctly.
Yeah. There is an evaluation of the LLM, but an evaluation is different than a stamp of approval. And this is a very important open question that's coming down the pike, which is, will there be a stamp of approval? One thing to think about is in terms of, I think back to when Uber was invented. And the taxi companies were like, oh, it's not safe. You're just getting in some random person's car. Who knows what they did, and the first time I heard of Uber, I was like, you got to be kidding me. There's no way I'm just going to call someone up on my phone and get in the random car. And, who knows if they know where they're going or who it is. And I was like, I'd never do that. And now I haven't called a taxi in years. I only use Uber. Right. And it's not, and also the local governments tried to ban it. The taxi companies tried to, get the governments to ban it. But people just used it so much, they weren't able to stop it. It was so helpful. And so I don't know if that's the path that we're going to experience in mental health or not, but it is a path that we should consider is on the menu. And to not be thinking in terms of this black and white, is it approved or banned, is it good or bad, or anything like that, but more like, how can we partner with the LLM companies to improve the safety profile of the services? I think will be of kind of the greatest potential impact on our clients, which is really what we should have as a first priority.
Let me just add to what Tony said. And I think in our conversations with colleagues in the field, it's always very future-oriented conversations, what will happen. And I think it's very important to have a conversation of what is happening. So pragmatically, this is already happening. We don't know exactly the scale, but I think the conversation should assume right now we are probably not underestimating how much is already happening. And so time is of the essence. Like these kind of studies, these kind of collaborations are of the essence. It's not 5 years from now.
Yeah, if our survey data generalizes, it would suggest that ChatGPT is the largest provider of mental health support in the country. bigger than the VA, bigger than anything. And we can't be sure, but I'll tell you, anytime I talk to a friend who works in IT, he's like, oh yeah, of course. He's like, you couldn't publish that. Everyone knows that. Like, I'm like, therapists don't know it. And so one way to consider this is through a harm reduction approach, right? Like, it's out there, it's happening. And so how can we contribute to people having safe experiences?
So I think with that harm reduction point in mind, and sort of harkening back to what you were saying about, a therapist having that realization, oh my gosh, my client is using this all the time. But like, what are some thoughts you have for therapists today, right now, working with clients? Like, how would you suggest they approach this?
Great question. First of all, I would ask about it explicitly. Right? This is what we learn to do with suicide. Is therapists, when they're in training, are often, they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about suicide because, I blah, 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 blah. And we're like, no, you got to talk about it. You got to use the S word. You got to say suicide. So it's the same with AI. You got to talk about AI. You got to ask them explicitly, are you using AI for any kind of psychological, emotional support? If so, what are you doing? How are you doing it? What's the advice it's giving you? Just find out, make it part of the conversation. And then you kind of work with it like you do with everything else in someone's life. And there's an infinite range of answers you're going to hear, but open the conversation.
Alex, what are your thoughts?
I would add to that if you are willing, it is good that you yourself experiment with it. So I think you don't have to be pro or against it. Again, Tony and I are not pro or against it. I think learning about it's going to be very valuable. And so I've been recommending everyone to just try it out. Like, don't have an expectation of how good or bad it's going to be. Just learn about the ecosystem because it's probably here to stay anyway. So just typing it out and having like the frustrating experience, like, oh, it didn't give me what I wanted or whatever, that's going to be very important data. So I think for therapists to just have just a little bit of time to just see, okay, what's going to happen if I throw this question to it? Let's just see what happens. I guarantee you, because this is what happened with me and Tony. I was telling you at the beginning of our conversation, we had this scheduled out meeting every week. We'd be trying it out. We'd report back to each other. As weeks went by, the same kind of stuff that we were asking it, we were getting different outputs. So in a very short amount of time, we were already seeing differences in the types of responses that we were getting. And I think that's very valuable information for us as clinicians, right? To see how it's evolving. So experiment.
Every one of us, most of us, have the option of opting out in our own lives. And of course, it's completely legitimate. But if you serve the public, I think there is something of a responsibility to be aware of what many people in the public are engaging with. You don't have to approve it. You don't have to give your stamp of approval, but to be aware of it and to have, and to get some limited experience trying it and using it.
So are you thinking, bring it up, talking about it, learning about what your client is doing. And so we would imagine that for any therapist, some meaningful percentage of their clients are using these tools. And then what? That clients, that therapists are learning about it, being open, being sort of humble to get their sense. Should they be warning their clients, don't use it in these circumstances? This seems like it's helping you. Like, how do you imagine some of those conversations going?
Look, it's really complex. I mean, if you have a client who's prone to mania or delusions, they should be not asking it for advice, because it will very possibly amplify the mania or delusions. However, if you have a client with a fear of public speaking, and you've been working with them to reduce a fear of public speaking, it might be potentially very helpful for them, if they've got a talk coming up, in the hour before the talk, to use the AI for some practice or some support, to rehearse with the AI something they've already rehearsed with you in session. So we have heard multiple examples of it being used to successfully reinforce what the therapist is doing in session. But it depends a lot on the client and the situation and the diagnosis and all. This is what makes our field so interesting is every client is an N of one unique case.
And I think getting back to Alex's point when he said for therapists to try it themselves, that when we ask our clients what their experiences are, how they're using it, that's actually for the therapist who's a little hesitant or unsure how to use it, that's going to give them ideas, right? So I have this client who's using it for public speaking, for when they're going to spend time with their daughter who they don't see very often and they have a difficult relationship with or whatever, right? That's going to give them sort of fodder for how could I, okay, so I have this client who's using it and she finds it really helpful for thing X. I'm going to use it for that exact same thing in my own life and see how it goes.
Great idea. Absolutely. Great idea. I mean, the therapist could even role play their own client and use ChatGPT while, pretending that they're their client and seeing how it responds to them. I love that idea, Dan.
And one of the things for therapists who are a little less familiar that, for many people, they're going to have ChatGPT on their phone or whatever the LLM of choice is on their phone, potentially as well as on other devices. And so if you have a client who's using it and you want to get a sense of that conversation, you could always ask the client if they could show it to you on their phone, right? So if you're concerned about that, how the LLM is responding or whatever, you just want to see that interaction, that anything I do on ChatGPT on my computer also then shows up on my phone, which is actually very convenient. And so that's another sort of thought for clinicians that if they're curious, because, we just, whenever a client or anybody describes something that they had an experience with, we're not always the best reporters of what actually happened.
Sure.
So one of the nice things about these LLMs is you can literally see turn by turn what the conversation looked like.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that, but you could absolutely do it. They could theoretically, they could even share it with you every week. They could email it to you or something. But yes.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? Big picture. What are your thoughts? It doesn't sound like we're out of a job yet.
No, I mean, I would reinforce what Alex said earlier, which is I would actually pull back from the urge. I would resist the urge to think into the future. Because often that thinking is kind of motivated by fear, and we don't know. I mean, the AI people don't know it's gonna be like in 3 years. There's no way we're gonna know. So I suggest staying anchored very much in the present and engaging with what's going on in the present. And that's why we're doing the safety research. And so we would encourage therapists who want to learn more about this to sign up for our study, because through our study, you're going to learn a lot about what's going on and the safety issues and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so, and make a meaningful contribution. It's easy to get kind of wrapped up. I just went through a series of mini panic attacks, and I could have just, gotten wrapped up in that. And instead I'm like, okay, look, I'm going to find a way that I can contribute no matter how little and, try to make a difference, and we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Alex, your thoughts?
I agree 100%. It's unfortunate when you work with someone so closely and you just can't find ways to disagree. I feel like an LLM now.
We do actually disagree quite frequently. We've just already hashed through these disagreements.
Exactly. This is the polished version, Dan.
But if you talk about deliberate practice, we could gin up some disagreements. Another interview.
Yeah. But I think that's a really great point, though, particularly for the therapist who does have a lot of exposure and experience with these models. Being a part of the study would be great because you have a lot of experience and insight to bring. But for those who have very little, it would be a really nice way to sort of have a little bit of an introduction to this process, what it can look like, ways to sort of in a more nuanced way evaluate what the models are doing. So it could be sort of a really nice introduction while contributing to the literature. And the one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the one thing I wanted to bring up is that if I remember correctly, Tony and Alex, that the that folks who are graduate students in training programs can also participate in this study. Isn't that
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I
So
think there'll
both
probably be
professionals and
a bunch of
graduate
those
students.
listeners who would fall into that demographic who would want to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we asked participants to just tell us what stage of training they're at, or where they are in licensure. But we're actually looking for as broad a demographic among mental health professionals as possible.
Yeah. Okay. So just for fun, while we wrap up, this is what I'm thinking. What one thing that you find that you found ChatGPT or one of these LLMs to be helpful for you in your life when it comes to any psychological, mental health, well-being sort of way. So I'll kick it off. So I created a custom GPT that asked me a series of like somewhat journal-y kinds of questions that help me think about what's going on in my life, what's going on in my work, and then help me like plan out my day so that at the end of answering these series of questions, it gives me like a to-do list based on what's stressing me out, what I need to do, and then what, and all that sort of stuff. So that's something that's actually been very helpful for me. Um, how about for the two of you?
I'll join you on that. So I'll tell you the most recent one. I always get kind of experimenting with it. So this weekend I got a suggestion for a specific prompt. As you know, most GPTs, kind of ChatGPTs, has like memory, so it remembers stuff as you keep talking about it. And mine, because I've been experimenting with it so much, has a pretty good memory of stuff I've said along the way. So the prompt that I gave it was, roast me mercilessly based on what you know about me. And it was hilarious when I got back, because I got basically a very funny psychological assessment. I will quote just part of it right now. I have it up here. It says, you want to enjoy things just for fun, yet you treat every hobby like it's a grant-funded PhD thesis.
Boom.
And how accurate was that, Alex, or is that?
I'm not going to disclose.
Boom. So I did something which I found kind of interesting, which is I told ChatGPT about myself, and then I asked it, what does it see as potential errors or omissions or weaknesses in my career choices? And it said that number one, and I completely agree, the number one potential error or omission is that my career has moved, especially in the past few years, heavily into program administration. We're starting this graduate school, run a training clinic, doing research, writing, and it says if you don't protect time for actual clinical work, seeing real clients, you could grow increasingly detached from actual clinical reality. And I 100% agree. I think it just, and that was a lingering kind of worry that every now and then would flow through the back of my mind, and it just put it right front and center. And so I think it really hit the nail on the head.
And what did you feed it? Was that based on its memory from your interactions with it, or did you give it some specific information?
It's all the memory of the interactions, and then also just what it's read about me online and that kind of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. I did not prompt it with that. I did not say I have had much, reduced hours for clinical work. That was not part of the prompt at all. It figured that out.
Right. And it's interesting, in both of your examples, a person can see like, what is it doing? I mean, it's not, in both cases, I would guess, Tony, you explicitly said I had thought about this, but Alex, I would guess you had also in some ways thought about it as well, that it gave you insights sort of that you already had, right? But then seeing it in that black and white kind of crystallized way, it's kind of like in therapy, right? A lot of times people know what's getting in their way, what are their stumbling blocks, whatever, right? But you come at it from a perspective where you're able to make it so, put such a fine point on it that people are like, I've always felt that, but you're right, that really is impacting blah, 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 right? That was kind of the experience that you had. And you could see how something just based on these text-based narrative interactions, how it could extract that And in both of your cases, it was like it did have this insight or this accurate summary or paraphrase or whatever that's just like, yeah, that's right. And to have you feed it back to me, it has a certain impact on me.
Yeah, you got it.
That's it.
Great. Okay, so if either of you has anything to add, please do. But first, so I will link to the Sentio website, to the handful of links that we've gone back and forth. Are there any other specific resources or links that you want to make folks aware of, or things that you want me to link?
Yeah, well, what we're providing to you has many, many, many outbound links. So I would just refer them to that. And I encourage people to consider signing up for our study just as a way to learn about AI and make a contribution.
Great. And because this has been a very freewheeling conversation, do either of you have anything additional that you want to add, or last words that we haven't gotten to hit?
I would just say thank you, Dan, for having us on, and thank you for taking this topic seriously. And I think this could be a real, service to your listeners.
Yeah. Alex?
I agree, Dan. You're not living in the future, you're living in the present, because we're doing this right now. So congratulations.
Well, thank you both. This has been wonderful. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. If you found it helpful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video where we continue exploring the science of psychotherapy and applied psychology.